oh, I want to be the ways of your day with turn by turn instructions of like what to expect next. People get that because you are leveraging something that's a known entity. But I feel dirty using someone else's IP essentially and like brand awareness to, I guess, hype up my own. So I don't know. I'm really, really mixed feelings about that. I don't have that in writing per se anywhere. And I've only mentioned that colloquially, but every time that I do, I catch myself. Like it doesn't feel natural.
Welcome back to Worldie Unboxed, the Founders Edition. This week, we're bringing you another two-part episode featuring Zoya Lehrer, founder of Orgo, a company revolutionizing how active families navigate life's chaos. After 20 years in corporate America, Zoya decided to take a leap of faith, leaving behind a stable career to pursue her entrepreneurial dreams. In part one, we'll dive into Zoya's inspiring journey, what drove her to step away from corporate life, and the spark that led to the creation of Orgo. We'll explore how she built the business and the lessons she's learned along the way. Stay tuned for part two, where Aaron and I will reflect on the conversation with Zoya and discuss how her experience mirrors our journey at worldie. Don't forget to join the worldie community at worldiebrand.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insights and episode highlights. All right, let's talk to Zoya.
So where do you want to start?
Gosh, there's just like, I don't know. I think our journeys are really paralleling right now, which is interesting. And so we're not in similar spaces. We may or may not be talking to the same audience, who knows? But I think there's so much kind of gold that could be hidden within where you're not bringing somebody in who's at the tail end of their journey or they're talking about their story retroactively. It's happening real time right now. And you've been very public, as have I. And so I think that there's just, kind of an inherent dialogue therein.
So what has that process been like? So why did you decide to be public about your journey? What have been some of the, benefits of that, the challenges of that? Just how's that felt?
I didn't know that was a thing. Like, this is how non LinkedIn I have been in my years in corporate. Like, I didn't think that building in public was a nomiker that someone gets when they just talk about the things that they do. And then, kind of walking into that naturally by way of just the dialogue that I've started to have through the months, I was like, oh wow, this is feeling good but honest. And so the level of accountability kind of came up. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, wow, I'm accountable to the team, I'm accountable to myself, I'm accountable to my family, my friends, etc. But it's just it's a different dialogue having that externally. So I don't know, kind of walked into it. How about you?
Same kind of thing. I look back at it and I'm like, why am I doing all this stuff? Why am I posting on LinkedIn every day? Why are we doing a podcast? Why are we posting on all these different social media platforms? And I can't even remember what made me do it at the
Mm,
beginning, but I've just seen so much value from it
yeah,
that I just continue to do it because there's been kind of like partners that we've worked with that we've been introduced to through LinkedIn. A ton of my friends or contacts, they kind of like reach out to me and they say, hey, I know this person in the industry. Maybe you should talk to them. And it's all these little things here or there where, I mean, a ton of days, nothing comes from it, but you see a lot of kind of like connections and potential business partnerships come through it. So that's really why we continue to do it. But it definitely is kind of stressful. And we've talked
yeah.
to certain people that say, I'm not really into building in public because it's a waste of time or you end up just chasing likes. So I think you have to balance it against everything else you're doing and avoid becoming one of those just kind of like startup influencers where you're
Mm.
just selling the idea of starting a business, but not actually really doing anything.
I think it's quite the opposite. If you're building in public, like you're actually doing something and then becoming vulnerable to that process, I think is the most honest thing kind of about this opportunity is to share. Whereas I see, and we all do as well, that others kind of pontificate on pages that, yes, do get the likes and kind of, I don't know, iterate through the same type of messaging over and over again, knowing exactly that that's a nerve that they will hit. I'm like, well, what are you actually doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, I'm right now in the gutter of like with the team trying to figure out how to get out of like firebase hell. Like, what are you doing? You know? So to
Yeah.
me, if anything, it's kind of like indicative of work being done. And I actually think it's, I don't know, a little different than the influencer kind of vibe.
I think so too. Do you like posting on social media, or does it feel kind of unnatural?
It was very unnatural, and I mentioned that, in one of the things that I've shared was that coming out of corporate, that was definitely the biggest, transition from a mind share kind of shift, is to say, "I am asserting my own voice. I'm not an extension of the corporate brand. I am not the opinion of, the masses that I just get to kind of regurgitate on a stage as I have or panels or other conversations. Like, this is me. This is how I feel. These are my observations. These are my experiences." And that was a huge shift. And Aaron, I don't know if it was for you and you kind of fell more naturally into it, but that was like a jarring shift between not at all to here's everything and nothing and maybe some of it, not all of it. Like what resonates, what's relevant, what's accountable. I don't know. It's been a hit or miss. How about for you?
It's been similar. It was a very, I would say, painful process because I'm a pretty private person. Like I keep to myself.
Mm,
I don't like promoting myself. I don't like kind of putting myself out there.
yep.
So like I don't really use social media in my personal life. And
Hmm.
even on the platforms that I am on, I like never post. Like I probably haven't posted since like 2009 on like any social media platform before I started posting on LinkedIn. So it's definitely an adjustment and getting used to, putting stuff out there and no one likes it or comments on it and understanding, okay, that's just part of the process to understand what resonates and what doesn't and just get
Yeah.
better. And then also just the amount, because I was talking to my co-founder about this the other day, just the amount of feedback that you get when you decide to build in public, solicited and unsolicited.
Unsolicited. Yep.
It's crazy because you have people on the social media platforms, right? They'll see something and they think they know more than you do. They'll make recommendations. You'll have family or friends, if you're just like out to eat or whatever, they'll ask you about it and then they'll start giving you business advice. And just that whole process of being inundated with feedback, I think that's difficult too, because it's just hard to sift through it all. And you don't want to
Yep.
be that stubborn person who's just like, no, I'm just going to do it all my way. But at the same time, you just get so much feedback. A lot of it is conflicting. A lot of it is bad, to be honest. So you can't really take all of it into consideration. So that's another thing that I've just been trying to work through,
How do
throughout this
you
process.
have you ever asked for help directly? Have you had an ask by way of the sharing? You mentioned partnerships and kind of the natural things that, stem from these relationships that begin to develop, but have you ever stated a direct ask that was answered by way of that call?
I would say so. I can't remember one off the top of my head, but actually I can. So when we were starting our podcast, I was basically saying, me and my co-founder, we're going to do the stuff on I call it the front end. So getting the
Mhm.
guests, recording, stuff like that, telling the person who's editing what we want to cut, what we want to keep. Like, hey, does anyone know someone who knows how to edit podcasts?
Sure.
And then one of my friends from high school actually reached out and he's like, yeah, I could do that for free for you guys. And then someone we go to law school with offered to help as well. So there's been other examples like that too, I'm sure. That's the one that kind of stands out. But I definitely have noticed that if you ask,
That's
people will
right.
help.
Yeah, I think that's another takeaway is that aside from the sharing and kind of, taking part in the journey and this being part of the process, the ask itself, once you kind of crystallize what it is that you need and speak directly to the audience that you think would be in the receiving end of it, I think that's the other added value.
So you mentioned a couple times that your background is kind of in corporate. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like my background is kind of corporate too.
Yeah, sure. So 20 years of mine in financial services, banking, insurance, SaaS, always in the technical capacity. That's been my chosen path by way of my degree, computer science slash information technology. And I'm a second generation techie from my mom and my parents. So this has been kind of a very planful journey all along. I wanted to do psychology early on, but like that didn't pan out. And so I just stuck with tech. And so, yeah, I just kind of did that within the geography of New York, New Jersey, which has no shortage of financial institutions that kind of lent to a very colorful career. And it was wonderful until I don't know, like something struck in me. It's that 20-year milestone, something about that number. Where I was like, is this what the next 20 is going to be? Like, what are we doing with all these great skills? And they truly were. I mean, it's just like the sharpening of negotiation skills, presentation skills, technical, of course, delivery, execution, managing teams, all of it. That's got to culminate to something. And so that's when I started to ask questions of myself, and then kind of gave I guess, a surprising answer, and kind of took this pivot. How about yours?
So my background is like extremely corporate. So I think when you reached out, you mentioned that your husband went to Penn.
Yep.
So I went to Penn for undergrad, did consulting for a few years out of undergrad. And then I just graduated from the University of Chicago, where I got my JD and MBA.
Congrats.
So thank you. That was a very difficult journey, very rigorous in terms of the academic side, and then trying to start a business as well, and then studying for the bar exam, passing that. So the last 3 or so years have been pretty tough. So now it feels like just running a business is easy. But I felt like I needed that kind of I needed to start in corporate to learn some basic skills, because
Sure.
I still feel like I don't necessarily have a tangible skill set. I'm very much a generalist, and
Hmm.
I'm pretty good at figuring things out. I'm pretty good with numbers, pretty logical, all that kind of stuff, but I'm not like a marketing expert or a logistics expert or anything like, or designer or anything like that. So I feel like at this stage of my career, the thing I do have is time and energy. So I'm
Mm.
trying to just do a lot of things through the brute force
Doing.
method. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of where I am. I still feel like I'm a little bit earlier on in my career. So I want to make I'm really focused on kind of like surrounding myself with the right team, because I feel like they're out there and they're definitely gonna help me. And I just know how hard it is for first time founders. So I think every first time founder should try to find some kind of like superpower that they have and really lean on that, because if you don't, then it's just so hard otherwise.
Yeah, I love that you said first time founders, because I think that that's such a subjective term. I apply, or that term rather applies to me technically. I wouldn't say that my skill set and the career trajectory where I'm at in my first time founder journey is similar to yours for the reasons you've just described. Yet our challenges may be similar or not, right? Our resource pool may be different, et cetera. And so I just think that there's these statistics that kind of talk about, oh, first time founder failure rate, et cetera. I just think it needs to be qualified with the actual skill set and the level of experience. Like, look at your experience. It's truly unique. Surely that positions you for something that is differently poised than someone else who's a different type of first time founder coming out from a slightly different walk of life. I'm not sure the point I'm trying to make. I just think it's always an interesting observation that first time founder is a category, but it's so diverse in terms of what and who's within it.
It is. And I mean, I technically fit into it too, but I've asked, because I've done kind of like entrepreneurial things in the past,
Mhm.
but I've never made a sale. So that's why I don't
Mm.
consider myself,
Okay. So
um,
you've got your own criteria.
that's why I do. Yeah, that's why I consider myself a first time founder, but I've tried entrepreneurship in the past, but this is the
Mm.
first time that I've really, done it for a sustained period of time
Mhm.
and put a significant amount of money around it, built a team. So that's the way that I
Yeah,
define it. That's why I think I'm a first time founder.
I gotcha. But what compelled you to pursue that concurrent to all the other stuff that you were already doing, seemingly as its own kind of, investment into your career? And then you started to what? Hedge the bet of like, if law schools doesn't work out or a different type of skill set coming out of it, I'm going to do this other thing on the side too.
I wouldn't say I hedged the bet. I would say more so I value education. And for a long time, I knew that I wanted to get at least one advanced degree.
Mhm.
And then it's kind of funny because I was like, yeah, I want to get an MBA, but I've already done so much business school curriculum. And when I
Yeah.
was an undergrad, like my junior and senior year, half of my classes were with MBA students.
Mm.
So I was like, I'm not really going to learn anything if I just go back and get an MBA. So if I want to learn something in the classroom, I need to add another degree. And what's a degree that could be pretty helpful, even if you don't use it? And I thought a law degree, because in undergrad, I studied marketing and legal studies.
Okay.
I really liked the way that business and law, they kind of like worked your brain in different
Yeah.
ways. And law is kind of like super granular, business is more high level. So I thought if I could, I'm not mastering those skills in 3 years of school, but if I could get pretty good at both of those skills, then that would be a pretty unique skill set and would set me up to do well in anything that I wanted to do afterwards. And I just got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug while I was in
Mm.
school. And it's one of those things when you get that itch or when you're
Yeah.
bitten, you kind of have to do it. So, I mean, I've been used to working really hard and doing a lot of different things, juggling a lot of different things throughout my life. So it felt like similar to things I'd done, but just kind of like ratcheted up. So, and I knew it was temporary. So that's kind of like why I decided to pursue this while I was still in school.
Yeah, I love that that was so strategic, right? Because it's like an actual skill set that you can envision being an extension of the work that you envisioned for yourself down the line. And better get a jump start on it now is kind of what I'm hearing. So
Yep.
you've got the
Yep.
capacity to balance so much. And I think that we're all, testing our own limits here, and clearly you continue to push yours.
So how's it been for you with the family and
Yeah.
starting a
Speaking of
business?
limits.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, one thing that I don't have is time, which you've cited certainly to your advantage. So my time is very segmented, right? There's the workday, which it always has been, and then there's the family life thereafter, and then there's evenings, on the couch when you still have that laptop open, and it's no different. It's the same rhythm. It's just like you kind of learn to work within those constraints, and you become super efficient. So like you don't have the luxury to just, I don't know, take hours to like contemplate something. Like you just become super action oriented, and there's so many studies that are done. It's like your brain on parenting mode is on. It's like you're multitasking, all these different tabs are open, et cetera, whatever analogy you want to use. That's precisely it. So it just kind of makes you more efficient, sharper thinker, I think quicker doer. You got no time to waste, no bullshit to have. And so that's kind of the team as well, is that's our construct. We've got so many constraints. The rest of the team is moonlighting. I'm full time, so it's a different kind of combination that we're contending with, but nonetheless, time continues to be our biggest constraint by far.
So what does your team look like?
Yeah, we've got a CTO, we've got a VP of engineering, we've got a head of UX and product, we've got an advisor, and we've got myself who's doing pretty much anything that falls out the bottom. So I wouldn't say I'm a technical founder, or a co-founder rather, although I do have the majority of the technical skills that I've obviously deployed throughout my career. But in this particular construct, I've chosen to lean into the marketing and the strategy and just kind of, the overall all else category, at least for now, while we're so small. So back with you on that generalist front for sure.
And how'd you find all those people?
Oh, it's my favorite part. Everybody knew kind of somebody. When the idea, I guess, germinated, right? That 20-year mark, that was like, what am I doing next? I reached out to a colleague that I'd previously worked with at a prior institution. And I just recall him being so knowledgeable, yes, of course, but just really level-headed. I really loved his disposition, like his demeanor and the way that he handled conflict and tough situations. And I just thought that somebody would be a wonderful sounding board to the concept and the idea that began to brew. And so we got together for coffee. We sat down very casually, just kind of caught up. It's been years. And then just from parent to parent, technologist to technologist, I began to share, here's the problem, here's an opportunity, here's a potential solution. Does this thing have legs that you think, again, from a technical perspective, is worthwhile to pursue? It was nothing more initially than a validating conversation to say, we're like, you're kind of onto something. And then 2 hours later, it became an impassioned discussion that aligned ourselves not only from a problem statement, but we became impassioned about the solution. Long story short, coming out of that 2 hours, we kind of were on the same page that maybe we want to take this thing on together. And we saw the world similarly. I think that that's the biggest takeaway. Anybody could share that passion and kind of have that vision and want to work towards something great together. But the how is really became the differentiating factor. We wanted a bootstrap. He felt compelled to bring his hands back on keys, so to speak, and kind of dive back into development, even though he's been a very senior manager for, the latter part of his career. And so he felt challenged by that opportunity. I too had become very open to upskilling and in all areas that obviously would be a gap within the team itself. We knew that we needed a UX and product designer. So that's the kind of role that we sought out next, because at the end of the day, like, we're not baking cookies, right? Like, we're designing a digital experience that requires that type of a skill set. And so that's the trifecta that we initially foresaw. And then, additional team members kind of came in by way of close knit relationships. And so that's kind of the team that we stand as today: sweat equity, zero external capital raised, 100% bootstrap, launching a product into mass market imminently, if I can just please, and we just please kind of get out of the current state that we're in. And so that's been our journey to date in the last year.
Makes sense. And what's
Yeah.
your strategy around the product launch? Is it just kind of, I know you talked about like an alpha and a beta. I'm not
Sure.
really a tech guy, so I don't
Yeah.
quite know the difference between those two. So can you just talk about kind of what your strategy is there?
Absolutely. So we'll kind of go back in time a little bit. So back in October of last year, we launched our alpha. And I hate the word MVP. So for lack of a better word, that was it. It was the first iteration of a product that we were able to bring to a set of users that essentially would validate its value. And so we did that with a cohort of about 30 users that we assembled through, relationships, local community, and so forth. And we had them live with it on their phone, physically installed through test flight for about 3 to 4 weeks. And we worked very closely with them to mine for that feedback and get those observations and conduct usability studies and really understand if what it is that we had put out as our hypothesis, right? Like, in terms of, here's what a potential solution could look like and an experience that we've designed around it. Is there value in that? So we've got great, encouraging testimonials. Of course, it's not perfect. Of course, there were many feature requests and observations that we ourselves have made as well. So that was also pretty validating, is to hear that you see what I see. You kind of assume the same things that we assume in terms of next step, next level value. And so we had concluded that phase, again being alpha, at the end of October. And so we scrapped it. We could have continued to build features onto it. We could have, features stuffed. We could have just kind of taken it right into market at that point. But we really wanted to reinvest and replatform and retool and revisit the infrastructure, I would say. We added a database layer. There's some backend logic. There's scaling that is now better positioned, whereas before there was none. So there's a lot of kind of preparation and readiness that we ourselves, as kind of a seasoned team, foresaw to be of importance. And so we took the time to invest in that. So that essentially was the months of November to now. And it's been a long journey because we are iterating seemingly on the same things. We kind of have already test driven a few of those things with 30 users, but again, 30 is not 300, 300 is not 3,000, and so forth. So many of those learnings are still ahead, but nonetheless, that's kind of been the work that we've been heads down pursuing as a team since that time. And so for us to launch in mass market, you can call it whatever, beta, um, launch, we're just bringing a capability that we've designed in a comprehensive platform capacity into market. And then we're not going to limit the users in terms of who's able to find us. We will ensure that it is available to the public. My dog Lola agrees. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to cross the finish line with imminently, as I keep saying, imminently.
Makes sense. And it's an app, is that right? Or is it like
It is. It's an
okay,
app. Yeah, we've got visions for B2B and, AI and all those things, but like, the initial value proposition, the basic most value proposition, is in fact a mobile app launching with Apple first, soon to follow with Google Play and Android. And so that's kind of our go-to-market strategy in the immediate weeks,
yeah,
days, as fast as we can get there.
yeah, that makes sense. And what are the main features that you're planning to launch with?
Yeah. We're revisiting, I hate to say the word, digital calendar. I'm sorry, it's like public enemy number one, but it is inherently part of the capability. We have reimagined what a calendar should look like and could function as from a personal logistics perspective. It is an extension of what you know and use today. It's just augmented to reflect the life and reality that we actually live. So that's kind of one component. And then because we built it out as a platform, it is an ecosystem that then permits much better communication amongst all that are involved in that particular, what we call crew. So you don't come into it by yourself. You bring in your family members, your kids, your mother-in-law, your sister-in-law, anybody who's kind of in your ecosystem every day. And the communication starts to flow much more naturally as a result of you kind of operating in this joint capacity.
That makes sense. And this is kind of like a stepping back, like founder to founder question. How do you think about people who use a competitor or just like some other
Mhm.
startup to explain their own idea? Do you like that? Do you dislike that?
Oh, that's so good. Because I've started to fall victim to it a little bit. The best way that I've started to kind of describe, like, oh, I want to be the ways of your day with turn by turn instructions of like what to expect next. People get that because you are leveraging something that's a known entity. But I feel dirty using someone else's IP essentially and like brand awareness to, I guess, hype up my own. So I don't know. I'm really, really mixed feelings about that. I don't have that in writing per se anywhere. And I've only mentioned that colloquially, but every time that I do, I catch myself. Like it doesn't feel natural. What
Yeah,
about you?
I feel a bit dirty whenever I do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where the times where I'm tempted to do it, and the reason I asked is because I was listening to this other podcast that you were on, and I remember one of the hosts, he was just kind of like kept saying, I don't really get the idea. Like, can you
Yeah.
explain it again? Can you explain it again? And anytime that happens where it's like, okay, this person isn't really getting it when I'm
Hmm.
describing what I view as the unique differentiators. So let me just make it a little bit more basic for them and
Mm.
use terms that they do understand. Right. So for us, we could use Nike, like we could say
Sure.
we're the Nike for kids age 4 to 8, for example. And people would understand that, but then
Yeah.
naturally they'd be kind of like, well, Nike is the Nike
Right.
of
Exactly.
shoes
Doesn't
for,
Nike
yeah.
have a shoe between the ages of
Yeah,
48?
yeah, exactly. So then you can use, companies from other categories like Nerf or
Hmm.
something like that. But then it gets complicated, and it's almost like
Yes.
at that point you should just explain what you are, not try to trade off of other people's names to make it sound like what you're doing is really cool.
I love that so much. And I think that the show me, don't tell me tactic really comes into play to the extent possible. Because for a while for us, we've been stealth mode in terms of, and we still are, we're waiting to flip on our new marketing site that finally shows. And like, I don't have to use the words to describe that the water's wet, like I can just show you, like, this is the thing that it does. And you for yourself can conclude if that's of value and you can click here to download and use it yourself, etc. But until then, we have been reliant on the power of our words. And that's been a challenge for you. It's the same thing. It's like, show me what's unique, right? Like what I love about your product is that it's tangible. It's an actual product. You can interact with it. You can touch it, you can show it, you can kind of call out some of those benefits. So I agree with you. I think we just need to kind of learn to lean on that and become empowered through the storytelling of our own product.
For sure. And I know you said you hate the term MVP,
Mm.
but what do you think about this idea of, because there's a ton of people who are outside of the startup space who will be like, you should just launch, even in the startup space too. They're like, you should just launch it. It's never going to
Fail
be per.
test.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's not going to be perfect. And then you
Yeah.
have these other people who say you only get one shot. If it's terrible,
Mm.
no one is ever going to use your product again. And as founders, I think we want to release something that's really differentiated,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it takes longer. And like we want to get feedback as quick as possible, right? And
Mm.
the way to do that is to release something quicker. So how do you think about those kind of like competing priorities? Are you okay releasing something that's not kind of like as differentiated as the final product would be, or do you want to kind of keep it back until it really is something that is significantly better than other things that people are using?
Aaron with the questions. Love that. Okay, so let's break it down. So alpha for us slash MVP, whatever again you want to call it, was precisely that. I cannot fathom a world in which we would still be iterating through what we thought was a good idea without those sets of eyes, however few they may have been, however non-scalable they may have, represented that particular version of the solution to be. We definitely passed our own sniff test of being embarrassed. I sat my very close friends in this very house. We had a little launch party. We had some food and some nibbles. We did a presentation for them. We installed this thing on their phone. We split them out into 2 rooms and we kind of navigated the rooms and ensured that they had a smooth onboarding experience and, obviously kind of sent them on their way. We opened up a WhatsApp group and just continued to communicate. And as I mentioned, that we mined for all of that feedback. We were embarrassed. There were bugs. I had to explain those bugs. I had to say, "Yep, we know. Thank you so much for observing. I'm glad that you found the same." Right, like you kind of have to like soft land so much of what is already out there that they themselves are seeing for the first time, and you have to validate that. Like you can't poo-poo it to be like, "Oh my god, this again? Like this is another bug? Like we fucking know." No, it's like their eyes are valid, their observations are unique in their own. And so taking care to kind of, share and empathize with like their frustration or their thoughts and ideas and so forth, like that was part of the process. And that takes energy. That takes very deliberate kind of receipt of that information, much like in the way that you were describing earlier with feedback. It's like you're asking for that feedback, but now you're getting it and you're like, oh shit, there's a lot of feedback. Like I didn't see it the way that you see it now. And like, it's a lot now. But yeah, so alpha really served as that initial Band-Aid rip for us. I imagine it's going to sting and hurt a lot more once we come out into the public market. The way that I think about soft landing it there, and that's the work that's about to start kind of in parallel to that, in some way it already has, it's to build a community. So as part of our go-to-market strategy, because for me personally, and perhaps for you as well, the product founder fit, or rather the problem founder fit, is so strong. It is directly stemming from my personal life, from my observations, from my frustration, et cetera. So I can speak and narrate to it in first person narration. And so what that does is then it opens up, a narrative that is happening, in other social channels that we're about to launch soon, et cetera. So that community building aspect is how I'm envisioning, or at least naively I'm envisioning, that we're going to be able to like soft land this thing and say, come on in. We want you to be part of the process. We want you to be part of the journey. We welcome that feedback. Once again, we're opening up multiple channels for you to reach us and kind of convey some of those thoughts and ideas. And let's make this thing better together. Because I mean, I don't care to design it for myself. I want to make sure that it's valuable for you too. So that's kind of the next level of that community joint hybrid approach. Test a little bit first, open up the floodgates, flinch a while, and flinch a lot, I'm sure, and then just kind of invite everybody in.
Yeah, that's something that me and my co-founder talk about a lot. Like, do we want to be a founder-focused company or more of a product-focused company?
Mm.
And where we've landed on that is in the early days, we want to be founder-focused because the athletic shoe space, it's kind of commoditized right now. And we're
Mm-hmm.
probably not going to be able to launch with anything that's like completely groundbreaking or like patented, things like that. Potentially we could do that in the future, but we just got to basically get some sales in the early days, get some money in the door, understand some different things, maybe improve our team. And then from there, we can kind of switch and become more of a product focused
Mm-hmm.
company as the product continues to improve and improve. But so my co-founder, he's a father of two, and we were both pretty good athletes when we were younger. So the way that I think about it is we're both, so my co-founder, like he is our customer, and I feel like I would be the customer 20 years ago.
Right,
Like this is
exactly.
the shoe that I wanted 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
that's the way that we're thinking about it right now.
See, again, a strong founder problem fit. A few years removed, sure, but you empathize with the problem in a very unique way that allows you to speak on it, right, from a first person narration. I think that that's super powerful. And that perhaps is a differentiating factor. As B2C is so difficult, and you and I kind of sit both within that bucket, it's like the least sexy thing ever. Everyone loves B2B, but like B2B sucks in the sense that it's really difficult to, personally relate to what it is that you're selling. Like another marketing automation engine. Oh, wow. Okay. Yes, I feel impassioned by that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I was going to ask, like, do you have other entrepreneurial ideas that come to mind, and how do you deal with those in terms of like, because if for me, I get super excited about some of my ideas and I'm like, I
Mm.
just can't go after like two or three different things at the same time. So how do you deal with those thoughts if you have them?
Oh, I love that. I have no capacity for additional thoughts. I hate to say it. I mean, this is truly all consuming. Excuse me. Ask my family, ask my husband, ask my friends who haven't seen me in many a week. When I do emerge, it's like, oh my God, where have you been? And why do you look like that? Because of the time component. And so it kind of comes back to the time constraint. And so I think my mind is so in the foxhole right now with where we are right now. Perhaps earlier, there may have been mind space earlier on in the stages where, there's so much ideation happening and, there's like anything was possible. We were a little bit, I can't, we were just diversified with what we thought we could take on as a team. Right. And so now we are deeply grounded in the reality of where we are, and we are maniacally focused on delivering and executing against that thing. So I think it's just like a trained brain to say, with a little bit of time and capacity, like the focus itself too is just like eye on the prize. I can't possibly take on anything more extraneous to that at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I know that I can't, but I still can't help but kind of like
Yeah.
think about, I don't know why, but just these different ideas are always coming to my head. So I just jot them down and then I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, like I'll look at them again in a couple months. And if they're still good, then
Yeah.
I'll just continue to think about them, but I'm not going to try to start multiple businesses at once because I think that's just way too hard.
It is hard. You've done multiple things before, but maybe, just maybe, it's time to kind of focus, at least for now, right? Because to bring this
Yeah,
thing to fruition, and there's enough to be done in order for that to occur. So,
totally, totally.
yeah.
So how has your idea evolved over time at all? Like, have you pivoted at all or no? Is it kind of the same idea that you started out with?
Yeah, so what I love about what you've shared in terms of the ideation and the pivoting and the iteration that you've had around your logo as an example, got
Yeah,
me reflecting back to some of those earlier stages. We too have had probably 3 versions of that. We never really locked it down. We ultimately always kind of honed in on the one that we currently use today, but there was a time that we were, contemplating others, and I'd like to share those as well at some point because they're fun, right? They're indicative of where the thought process was. And so when I think back on those logos, they trigger what we thought the product was going to do, what we thought it needed to convey. And I'm quite glad that we pivoted, yes, but just I think it's like a chisel effect. Like we just kind of really fine tuned that this is possible. All those things are still valid and we'd like to pursue them at some other point, but we really sharpen the pencil on what is the basic most value proposition that we need to enter with from like a truly foundational perspective upon which we can build on, yes, those features, yes, those capabilities, yes, those partnerships, etc. And I think that that's been a trying exercise for the team because we essentially have to accept the fact that it is limited. By our definition, is limited because in our minds we have such a greater vision for it. But trying to convey that in market and say, stick around long enough for like to see all the other great things that we've got brewing, that's going to be the challenge. And again, I kind of lean back on the community to say, invite them in the conversation, start to kind of bring them into that process, see if they want to stick around long enough to kind of find out with what lies beyond. But yeah, I think every logo for us is indicative of something else that we thought we were going to accomplish or achieve at that time.
yeah, yeah. We definitely, so we have kind of like a 5-year vision, a 10-year vision, a 20-year vision in our heads. But when we try to communicate that more broadly, like people
Yeah,
they don't really buy it because they're kind of like, well, let's see you do this first thing before,
and that's
you do
fair.
all these other things. Yeah.
And that's fair. Like I can paint you all day long. Like I'm most excited about our B2B vision and all the AI shit we're gonna do. Like it's distracting, right? So like having that really finite kind of roadmap, at least in the foreseeable future, that's gonna yield metrics, right? Like that's the biggest thing is like show metrics, show traction, show performance in the thing that you're already doing right now, and then be informed by that to then kind of, move on to the next.
Yeah.
Maniacally focused on that next step.
Yeah, and I think it's also just being obsessed with your customer and what's
Mhm.
most valuable for them, like what their pain points are and the easiest way to address those pain points. And then that's a way to kind of like stage some of these different things in terms of, okay, this is the most acute pain point. So
Yeah.
we'll go after this first. Then once we solve that, we'll go after the next highest pain point, and then so on, so on, so on.
Yeah, I love that there's a hierarchy. We think about that similarly. So when I talk about the foundational aspect of like the basic value most proposition, it is with that hierarchy in mind and kind of working our way from bottom up. Everybody wants to get to the tip of the pyramid. Everybody wants to deliver on that one golden nugget that's going to seemingly, right, resolve the issue. And then there's a lot of single feature apps or single feature offerings that kind of surround that one tip of the spear, but it's more complicated than that. So we've chosen to unpack that tip in a way that is hard and it's extremely data driven and it's very foundational. And so we're kind of taking on that bottom up approach as a result.
And you mentioned our logos too. I know I shared those like a
Yeah.
few weeks ago. So when we started out, our idea was completely different.
Tell me.
So it used to be the idea was a soccer cleat for former competitive athletes.
Okay.
So people who had played at a high level when they were younger, now they're just playing, maybe they're in their late 20s, early mid 30s. They still
Hmm.
want to play, but their priorities have changed a little bit. So they want something that's affordable, comfortable, aligned with their social values. It doesn't change a ton year to year. Because that was
Mm.
really the problem that I had was I played at a pretty high level when I was younger. And then when I wanted to continue to play after I graduated college, like I would walk into the soccer store and there'd just be so many different options. The stuff that I knew was quality was like $250. And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't play enough to really justify that. But at the
Hmm.
same time, I can feel a difference between something that's lower quality and higher quality. And I asked the guy in the store, like, hey, these are all the things that I'm looking for. Can you help me out? And he just had no idea what I was talking about. So
Mm.
it was kind of a major pain point for me. And then my co-founder, he has a similar background, but he played football. So we started out saying like, hey, let's just create some kind of company for former competitive athletes. And we talked to a bunch of people. We went through some programs at our MBA program, and we realized that the idea resonated with a lot of people, but it would just be hard because it's a small market in terms of
Mhm.
every year people get older, they play less and less, and they
Hmm.
they kind of like drop out of that market, and then they might be switching their shoes every like 5 years or
Sure.
sometimes even like 10 years.
Especially
And
with low use.
exactly. And they're also super brand loyal at that point. If someone's like
Mm.
30 and they wore Nike their whole life, they're not going to change at 31. So as we were talking to people, a lot of people are like, the things you were talking about, it probably makes more sense for kids. Like I'd love something like that for my kids. So then our second pivot was to a soccer cleat for kids. And then we realized that that really wasn't too differentiated. And then
Mhm.
also the target segment that we wanted to go after, which was kids when they're first getting into sports. A lot of their parents are not buying every single different type of sports shoe. So they're not buying a basketball shoe, a football cleat, lacrosse cleat, soccer cleat.
Oh,
You know,
I'm sorry, I am. No, I shouldn't be. Are
no,
you gonna develop something else that I shouldn't?
no, I mean that there are parents who do that, and there's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with it.
yeah.
But a ton of
I
parents
wish
are
I
just
didn't.
there's a ton of parents who are just like, this is way too much of a hassle.
Yeah.
My kid is not good enough at these sports for me to be doing that.
And also the
And
foot is growing literally by the inch, like, every minute, and
exactly,
so it just you can't keep up.
exactly. And they're also fickle. So your kid might be like, I really want to play soccer. And then as soon as they try it, they're like, yeah, I'm never going to play soccer again. And if you bought them a soccer cleat and they wore it, you can't really return it. So we were like, a lot of parents are already sending all of their kid to all these different sports in one shoe. Why isn't there a shoe in the market that's actually built for that?
I love that.
And
I
we
love
looked
that.
around and there wasn't. So we felt like that was the way that we could be differentiated. So, I
I love
mean,
that.
one of the things we've talked about is we're not really for Nike, or really understanding who we're not for. So
Mhm.
you mentioned that you buy your kid all these different shoes for all these different sports.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's completely fine if, you're not our customer, because we really want to focus on communicating like, hey, this is the behavior you do. Like for right now, you're probably not our customer. Maybe in the future we'll kind of like branch out and do sport specific footwear, but for this first version of the shoe, it's basically replacing the shoe, the kind of like all purpose shoe. So
Yeah.
that's the way we're thinking about it.
And I would love to be a customer in the sense that there's a product that actually exists, to your point, and the reason that I'm not today is because I too am forced into, we have like a trade program, basically. It's an unofficial one. So by the way, FYI, tap into that if you can. That there's like just, because they wear it so few times. And then especially if they're indoor cleats, like for lacrosse or whatever else, we just kind of trade off amongst the friends. And someone's foot is growing faster than the other, and it's another season that they've got left in it. And so it kind of becomes this like, hey, pass it along. But of course, everybody, especially as they get older, yes, they do create that brand loyalty. Yes, they want the cooler shoe, or they want the latest one or the latest trend. And so it becomes much more of an issue, which it doesn't sound like your target demographic, at least to start, is kind of like the starter pack, right? When you are that sports generalist, when you're trying a season here and season there. I'm talking about my 13-year-old who's been committed,
Yeah.
to a particular sport for a while. And so, yeah, I think that that's a huge opportunity, and the parents would welcome that from a financial perspective. It just makes sense.
Yeah. And we think about ourselves. I know I was talking about trading on other people's names before, but we think about ourselves kind of like IKEA, where, it makes sense when you're an 18-year-old in college,
See, that
or,
that
you know,
resonates with me because you're not
yeah,
having me compete with the Nike or whatever else and
yeah,
convoluting the same like value proposition. You're asking me to imagine the way that something else works and to apply that similar thinking to the way that you want me to think about the way you work.
yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So we're completely fine with people graduating out of our brand
Mhm.
and becoming a Nike kid, but we want to get them started out right. So when they're right now, the target age range is probably like 4 to 8. We might kind of go down a little bit when we start to maybe like 4 to 6, because that's when kids are really starting to get started in sports, maybe even a little bit lower. But we know around like 10, 11, 12, that's really when kids get a little bit more serious with sports, and when they're a little bit bigger. So having a specific shoe actually does make a bigger difference.
Yeah, not that my opinion matters. 4 to 7 to me just feels right. 4 to 6
Yeah.
is too narrow, goes too fast. There's only 2 seasons in it. Like, give it a
Yeah.
nice stretch between the 3. I would even say that 8 years old really could be a tipping point. I'm thinking back onto my 8-year-old, like, she was on travel teams at that point, like, she was already trying out for stuff, and so kind of doubling down a particular direction. 7-year-old, nah, she's, like, still floating around and having fun with it. So, I don't know, it could be a plus or minus number, but for me, 7 is, like,
Yeah.
a good initial starter
Yeah. I think
group.
that makes sense. I think we've said in our official documents 4 to 7/8. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
fair.
yeah, that makes sense. That
That's
definitely
fair.
makes
It's so
sense.
funny. I mean, like, ultimately here, you and I initially were like, "Oh, we're in 2 different spaces." No, we're talking about the exact same audience. We're talking about parents who are spending money on their kids, who are running around, whether it's logistics, sports, etcetera, activities. You've got the gear portion of it, right? Like, it's all part of the ecosystem. And so when I start to produce, kind of the content that I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna have to in these socials, which, like you, I do not love, but I feel like that's part of our go-to-market strategy, and so therefore I must. But on there, I did one video, which again, I've yet to post, but later I will. Um, this relates to you. My term FOMO, but FOMA. It's like parents, especially at your age group, are driven by this FOMA, which is fear of missed activities, which basically tells them that, like, if Jenny down the street is signing up for blah blah blah, like, oh, I better sign up for that too, like, because they want to have fun together. And then Johnny over here is trying out for travel. You're like, what? Now you get competitive. You're like, what do you mean Johnny's doing something I'm not doing? Like, of course we're gonna go try out. So you got to chase this dragon for a little bit until you do either learn that they do or they do not have a particular talent or a knack. But for a while, when they're young, like, you're just kind of doing that runaround for the sake of it because it's good for them. And then you got to expose them to everything. So the whole generalist aspect, I think, just really plays into that mentality so well because we're all compelled to, like, throw them into everything at this point. It's like what we all do. This is the
Yeah.
time that we live in.
Yeah. You think that FOMA is driven by the parent or the kid or both?
Parent, a
Oh, that's what
hundred
I
percent.
thought.
The
Okay.
kid would love to do nothing more than, like, sit on the couch, let's be honest, or, like, putz around with their friends. This is 100% parent-led and driven. 100. It's like tiger parenting 101. Myself included. I'm super guilty of that. That's why I can speak on it from first person perspective.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think as a kid, I might have been the one kind of like agitating, but
And at
maybe
what
I
age,
was,
right? Like, were you like,
yeah,
you had that grind going at, like, 5 years old? No, you were happy to, like,
yeah,
pick your boogers at the playground and,
yeah. I just like
hang
playing
out.
sports from a young age, but beyond that, I was happy to just kind of like stay at home and, watch TV, play video games, or just kind of like hang out with my friends.
Exactly. But because they're such an active participant, whether they want it or not, in today's world, that's kind of why we're so driven, with Orgo to include them into this ecosystem. And so, like, our vision and our experience is designed for the kids as well. Like, I see my 13-year-old 100% having this and being part of my crew. My 9-year-old is like, I'm begging for her to, like, get onto this thing as soon as possible because, like, they need to own their day also. They need to go about their day in a way that they feel they own it, and I think that that's where a lot of the friction comes into play is when something is being done to them. Oh, now I gotta take you here, I gotta take you there. They're kind of floating through space and time, right, in a way that they lack control around. That creates anxiety, that creates a triggering, developmental effect, et cetera. So that's part of, like, our bigger vision as well, is to say, let's arm these kids in this next generation of the things that they're already doing, but have them own their day and really become empowered to kind of execute on the time management skills that they'll need in life.
So, kind of switching gears a little bit, you talked about bootstrapping. Are you thinking at all about raising in the future or doing some kind of crowdfunding campaign or just bringing money in some way, or no, or just going to continue to do it the way you've been doing it to date?
It's a great question. It's an extremely timely one because that's the cusp at which we sit with these decisions. We've made it this far, and I'm being 100% transparent. This has been a decision that is allowed for us and the construct that we've, been able to put together that has operated in this year that's allowing us to have foregone the pre-seed funding that we otherwise would have sought to onboard a team of doers. So we did that through, means of sweat equity, et cetera. It's a very different world in terms of what lies beyond after launch, the type of runway that we would require, the type of support that we're going to have to, stand up, the type of vision that we'll want to ultimately deliver upon once those feedback loops start to come in and that feedback needs to be acted upon. So it's a long way of saying we're figuring that part out at the moment. Our team is burnt out, to be honest with you. There's a lot of pressure that is placed upon them, even in this early internally facing stage. We all appreciate and only imagine what that pressure will feel like externally facing. And so again, recognizing these constraints, et cetera, may continue to point us in direction where that may, necessitate a raise. But how and how much, like that's obviously what is in question right now that we're working through.
Yeah.
So it's not
And
an absolute, statement either. It's like you can't die in the bootstrap hill. And by the way, like you can totally have a meaningful infusion of capital and then just do that thing, right? Like run the business, bring it to a point of profitability, like be super disciplined with those funds and not necessarily go after multiple raises because I don't know if this is a VC 10x kind of a model yet until
yeah.
especially before we're able to exercise the B2B vision. So we're being super, super tempered in our consideration of that. How about
Yeah,
you?
I think we're similar. So I think bootstrapping it's kind of like an activity or a mentality. It's not
Mm,
exactly an identity. And a lot of
mhm,
people, it seems like there's kind of not a war, but there's a debate between people who are on the bootstrapping side and people who are
mhm.
on the VC side. And
Yeah.
if I had to choose, I would say I'm on the bootstrapping side, but like if we need capital, then we're gonna raise, but I don't want to raise before it's necessary. I don't want to give up equity before I need to. And I don't like we don't need cash right now. It's not going to really do anything for us. So I don't want to
Mhm.
raise while money isn't really going to be super beneficial for us. So I definitely see it as a possibility in the future, but it's not something that I'm going to consider until we need it.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a mentality, and also once again the discipline, right? Like it doesn't sound like you're chasing that dragon either. Like you don't want necessarily just to kind of go after it to make the announcement that you did. Like you're being really thoughtful about the needs of the business itself, and have that drive and inform what next steps financials need to follow.
Yeah. And I'm happy to grow slowly. Like I don't need to get to $50 million in revenue in like 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is. I'm happy for it to be slow and steady growth and something that we hold on to for a long period of time versus trying to exit within, let's say, 5 to 10 years.
Right. So you mentioned that you two agree from that community-based approach, right? In terms of bringing people in, not only from building in public, but also from a product perspective. So how are you guys envisioning to do that? Have you started on those efforts?
In terms of like creating some kind of community around the product or
Mhm.
something like that,
Mhm.
we've thought about it and so we've been looking into different platforms in terms of like what would work best. Someone recommended Discord to us. So we've been kind of
Mhm.
like playing around with Discord a little bit, but we haven't really invited anyone into it yet because we don't necessarily know how we would engage people. Like,
Mhm.
one way you could do it is just throw a bunch of people into a Discord or some kind of community, divide them up, maybe not divide them up, but create, sub channels and then just have them organically converse with each other. I don't know if that would necessarily work for us. Like if we just created a community and we have like a soccer channel, soccer parents channel, football parents, lacrosse parents, like I don't know if that would work or if we would have to kind of like prompt people or plant certain people in there who are going to like provide information, whether it's like coaches or
Mhm.
people who played when they were younger who can give advice, things like that. So we're still trying to figure out like how we can actually have a community that provides value and that's self-sustaining. So that's
Mhm.
been the reason why we haven't necessarily created a community for our customers or potential customers. But like we have on the kind of like building in public side, we have LinkedIn, we have a YouTube channel, we have a podcast now, we have a newsletter that we send out on a quarterly basis. So I think we're
Mhm.
doing pretty good on that side, but we have to do some more thinking on the community for like the customer facing community
Yeah.
side.
I would
So I
also question only because again, we're kind of operating within a similar audience, not from a design standpoint, but ultimately as the end user and the customer itself. I would question the channel. Like, is that where they are? Meet them
mhm,
where they are. Like, are the parents naturally in Discord such that when you bring them in, they're like, oh, I have many other channels already,
I
open in these
doubt it.
groups that I'm a part of.
That's another
Exactly.
reason why I don't necessarily want to do that
Yeah.
channel, that platform. So what do you think about that? What would you do in our shoes?
I'd go where they are, and I'm going there next. I too am not a user, as I mentioned. Like, I mean, I do very minimum stuff on Facebook. I'm very limited in terms of Instagram. I have zero presence on TikTok, but like that's where they are. And you almost have to accept the fact that you will assume a new identity if you decide to go into those channels and produce content in the way that is received by them, and that's okay. Like, you'll almost have to put on a different hat for that and flex a different muscle. That may not be you. You may have to work through others and influencers, et cetera, depending on your comfortability. I'm taking on a choice to say I'll give it a try at first before we do paid, placement, ad media, et cetera. But that's kind of how we've been thinking about it too, is like, we've got to meet them where they are. I would
Yeah,
love to throw them into Slack. Oh my God, that's like my life. Like, that would be
yeah,
so easy. And then just go talk amongst yourselves. What would you like? What would you? I just don't think that that's where they are. Nor is this type of this content, especially with yours. It's so visual. It's so tangible. It's so interactive. That's
yeah,
not flat form, you know, exchange with words only. Like, you need a visual
yeah,
representation of that.
yeah, yeah. I was just thinking in terms of I think you're right in terms of like if we're putting something out there, we definitely do
Mhm.
want it to be on like an Instagram, a
Yeah.
TikTok, something like that. But if we want to create a community of our
Mm.
customers, like can you do that through an Instagram or a TikTok? Is
Of
it
course. I mean, you
in
just
the
have to be super engaging, and but that is the community, right? Like the interaction, just like you do on LinkedIn.
mhm.
And I've met with like many go-to-market strategists and marketers who do this for a living, as I do not, nor do you. But having the advice that I've been given by them consistently is producing content is part A. Part B, C, D, and E is engaging with that content and making sure that that community grows through the power of that engagement. No different than on LinkedIn. And so you're doing that already. You're responding to the comments. Imagine if you just do one-way posts. It would feel awkward, right? Like, you would put something out and be like, people are liking it, people are commenting. You're like, bye to the next. Like, you can't.
I hate when people do that.
And I can't imagine that they do. And maybe it's just because
They
the
do.
connections that I've made are so highly interactive and engaging. But
There's a lot of
I'm
people who do that.
like, I can't imagine it. So like, that is a precedent for yourself as well to say, do not do that. And it's no different in those channels as well. And so that interaction, that engagement, the deepening of those relationships, the personal connection that they would feel to you, Aaron, as an extension of that brand, is where the strategy really kicks in. And you again have to like assume the responsibility of that identity. It's completely different.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you feel like you've learned about yourself throughout this whole process, either as a person or just as a professional?
We're going deep. Can I curse?
Yeah, of course.
I don't give a fuck. I give less than I ever thought that I did previously. I mean, I always was kind of like dancing to my own tune, to the extent that I was able in prior lives, but like even now more so, I don't give a fuck. Like, I don't know, just assert a lane, say what you want to say. I mean, obviously you want to be thoughtful about how you say it and the ideas that you convey and your beliefs, etc. But I don't know, just developed a much even thicker skin that I thought I had before.
Yeah,
So, care less. I wanna
yeah,
do more, I just, like, care less.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
I'd say on the negatives, like kind of getting a more realistic view of myself. I've always known that I'm stubborn, but
Mm,
I'm more stubborn than maybe I realized. And then on kind of like a positive side, I feel like I can do just about anything, which,
okay.
sometimes you have doubts, but I've done a lot of hard things throughout my life, and I've been able to do a lot of things throughout this process that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do. So I feel like I can I can do anything that I'm not saying I would be successful in every single thing I do, but I can do just about anything. So that's definitely been something that I've learned.
I love it, I love it. That upscale, right? It never ends. It's exponential, always.
Yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
Any last things that you want to ask me about
Last
or
things, I'm,
touch
like,
on?
talking to you all day, I feel like, we're
Yeah,
just, like,
yeah.
constantly interacting, so no, no last things, no parting words. Let's kinda come back in 6 months and see where we're at. I'd be super curious to measure the journey against then
Yes,
versus now.
that sounds good. And you should try to get on with my co-founder because he's got a like very different perspective than I have, and he's just got kind of like a different personality. So
I
I
love
think
it,
that'll be
but we can
fun.
also shoot the shit as parent to parent, right? Like the ones
Yeah,
that are kind of
exactly.
in it. So I
Yeah,
always think that that's a unifying battle that we're all kind of up against all day.
Yeah, I think you guys are in a similar stage of life, and I think you're probably similar age too. So maybe
Oh,
you
great.
would relate to him a little bit
Yeah.
more than to me.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. All right, Aaron, this has been a pleasure.
It's
Thank
been
you so
fun.
much
Yeah,
for having me on. Super
yeah.
fun. Best of luck.
Thanks
I'll see you out there.
for sure. Thanks for coming on. I'll talk
No
to you
worries.
soon.
Yeah.
Okay, see
ya.
ya. Bye.
Bye.